Last summer, I went to a camp where we stayed overnight. Once they took us on a hike deep into the woods. We set up tents, built a fire, and cooked hot dogs and marshmallows on sticks. We also told scary stories. One of the counselors told us about a lady who was thrown into a well on a nearby farm 100 years ago. Her husband didn't like her, so he threw her in the well and she died there. When they found her, her fingers had no flesh on them, and you could see the bones. I can still picture the counselor, his face half in shadows, half lit by the flashlight under his chin. They thought she wore her fingers down trying to climb out, he said, but there was no blood. Maybe the rain washed it away, or maybe she got so hungry down there that she started eating herself. He paused, and the only sound was the crackling fire. They say there's a creature in the woods now. It's quiet and hard to see, but it has gleaming white fingers like bones. It tries to sneak up on you, but don't let it, because when it finds you... I was already scared, so when the counselor suddenly screamed, "Look out!" and pointed behind us, I almost peed myself. I don't think I was the only one. Then they all laughed and I felt silly, but I couldn't shake off the fear. Some kids were crying. The counselors told us to stop being babies, put out the fire, and we went to our tents. Next thing I knew, it was morning, and something was wrong. I crawled out of my tent, and one of the counselors was on the phone calling for help. The others looked nervous and pale in front of Nathan's tent. Everyone was getting up, and the counselors told us to pack up quickly, but Nathan's tent was left alone. When the adults from the camp arrived, they unzipped his tent as we were led back to the cabins. I couldn't resist looking back. Our parents picked us up the next day. They said a wild animal had gotten into Nathan's tent during the night. But why didn't anyone hear it? Why wasn't his tent torn? And why were his fingers missing, leaving only shiny bones behind? I'm a student at a small-town college, and I work late nights from 4 p.m. to midnight, which is really tough. One night, our printer broke, so after work, I went to the campus library to print a research paper I needed the next morning. I thought it would be quick, just 20 minutes. I printed the paper easily, but as I left, I heard rustling in the bushes nearby. It's a small town, so I didn't think much of it. However, the rustling continued as I walked to my car, so I started walking faster. I wasn't too scared, thinking it might be a cat or some birds, but I remembered scary movies where being naive didn't end well. When I reached my car, I noticed the lights didn't come on even though I unlocked it. I tried to start it, but nothing happened. This had never happened before. My husband takes great care of our vehicles. I was confused and unsure what to do next. As I went to step out of the car, I felt something hard under my foot, like a hand. I screamed, jumped back inside, and locked the doors, feeling completely freaked out. After a few deep breaths, I mustered the courage to open the door again. I stomped down hard, but there was nothing there. I got out of the car and walked quickly back to the library. Just as I was about to enter the library, I heard a low, deep growl. I hesitated but decided not to face whatever it was. I quickly went back inside. As I crossed the safety of the library threshold, I felt a burning scratch on the back of my leg. I called my husband, and he came to pick me up. When we checked my leg at home, there were 3 scratches that broke the skin, but my pants didn't have any tears. The next morning, my husband checked my car and found the battery unplugged. Both cords were taken off. Someone had unplugged it, probably hoping I would check and be vulnerable. Luckily, I didn't know what to look for. The next day, I bought a printer and have never gone back to the library after dark. In 5th grade, I stumbled upon an enchanting Pokemon-themed chat room on Yahoo. The room had about 15 regulars, mostly between the ages of 12 and 16, and we spent hours immersing ourselves in various anime characters and storylines. I formed close bonds with a few individuals from the chat room, engaging in conversations on AIM or over the phone. Some of these friendships lasted for 4 or 5 years. One of these friends stood out from the rest. He had an intense passion for creature and monster models and stories, such as Godzilla and Spawn. He even believed in mythical creatures like chupacabras, which I found amusing but didn't mind. He lived in a rural area in the Midwest, which to my young West Coast mind seemed like the middle of nowhere. After countless hours of phone conversations, he opened up to me about something deeply troubling. He confessed that he would occasionally black out and wake up to find himself harming or torturing animals and children. He had several cousins and neighbor kids nearby, and he admitted to killing some animals. This revelation shook me to the core, as I've always had a profound love for animals. Despite his peculiarities, I grew to know him well, and he confided in me in ways he hadn't with others. Then, he shared an even more unsettling story. He revealed that his family or a family friend believed he was possessed by a demon and decided to perform an exorcism. The exorcism took place at night in a dark room, illuminated only by candles, with him tied to the bed for safety. As he recounted this part of the story, his voice trembled, indicating that he was still deeply affected by the experience. The process was eerie, but the most chilling part was when he claimed they heard something hit the floor under the bed as the demon left his body. Then, something scurried across the floor and out of the room, leaving claw marks in the wood. He was completely serious about this experience, believing that it had cured him, and he no longer harmed living things. His story has remained with me over the years, serving as a haunting reminder of the mysterious and inexplicable events that can unfold in life. The soft glow of the moonlight filled my bedroom, casting a comforting light on the tent I had created with bed sheets and a small table. At just 4 years old, this was my sanctuary, a place where I could color and play without a care in the world. That evening, my parents and grandmother were in the living room, their laughter and the sound of the TV creating a warm backdrop to my activities. I was completely absorbed in my coloring book, lying on my stomach inside the tent, when suddenly I felt a strong grip on the back of my thigh. Thinking it was my dad, I turned around, expecting to see his familiar face. Instead, I was met with a sight that sent shivers down my spine, a pale, unfamiliar hand retracting from under the table. My dad and I had the same dark skin, so this was a terrifying realization. I was paralyzed with fear, my heart racing as I tried to comprehend what was happening. How could someone be in my room without making a sound? The realization that there was an intruder in our home filled me with panic. I screamed as loud as I could, too scared to move from the safety of my tent. My parents rushed into the room, their faces a mix of concern and confusion. They searched every inch of the room, checking the windows, all securely locked, looking under the bed and even in the closet, but found no sign of anyone. I was inconsolable, trembling with fear as I tried to explain what had happened. We eventually moved to a new home, and thankfully, I never experienced anything like that again. But the memory of that terrifying moment when someone or something grabbed me right under my parents' noses and disappeared without a trace still haunts me. The feeling of helplessness and fear that washed over me in that moment is something I will never forget. I grew up in a sleepy town in southern Alberta called Bragg Creek. There wasn't much to do there, but every summer since I started university, my friends and I, who we called the Lifers, would reunite. We'd drive into the city for a night or two of partying, reliving our old days before returning to our adult lives. A couple of summers ago, 7 of us went into the city to visit a country bar. We planned to go back to Bragg Creek after the bars closed and stay at a friend's house since most of our parents had moved away after we left for college. On our way back to our friend's house, a haze settled over the road within the town limits. The The last stretch of road between the town and our destination was particularly sketchy, winding around a substantial amount of cliff face. I was in the back seat and suggested to the driver that she turn on her high beams because I could barely see a foot in front of the van from my seat. As soon as she did, a figure appeared directly in front of the van. She slammed on the brakes, and the van stopped within 3 feet of a woman standing there, her head down, arms limp beside her, and back turned towards us. We were all so startled, unsure of what to do, as the woman didn't even flinch when we slid to a halt behind her. After a few moments of deliberation, we crept the van up beside her and rolled down the front passenger window. The guy riding shotgun politely said, "You should really get out of the middle of the road as you might get hurt. It's very dark and it's hard to see you." The woman, who hadn't moved since we discovered her, lazily raised her hand to her jaw and used it to turn her face towards us. Her eyes were bloodshot, and her jaw looked like it had been dislocated, hanging slack as if it was broken. She tried to smile, but it was more like a grimace. It made my heart race like never before. I have never seen someone kick a vehicle into third gear so quickly. I still think about that night often. It was the scariest moment of my life.